Welcome everyone to Vermicomposting with Cheryl Thompson. My name's Emily Becker and I work with Rural Cap Grow. We're bringing this program to you in partnership with the Tribes Extension, which is the cooperative extension for tribes. And Cheryl, so glad you could make it. Cheryl is a wonderful gardening teacher. She's calling in from Nome. She's taught gardening there for many, many years and is willing to share with us today her knowledge about vermicomposting, composting with worms. All right, welcome. And Cheryl, go ahead and take it away.
All right. Well, just a little bit about me. I grew up in Nebraska, had grandparents that were farmers. Didn't really learn gardening with my family, but I picked up a lot of stuff from my grandmother that I didn't realize. And so I have lived in Nome for 40 years. And when I came here, I didn't realize most people thought you couldn't grow anything here. But so I just, started doing what I thought I could do and then learned as we go. So I've been probably teaching a gardening class for about 25 years and been gardening here for 40 years. So anyway, and I like it. It's something that makes me feel good. I think it's really therapeutic to have your hands in the dirt. I garden, you know, typical Alaskan methods, but in the ground, in the dirt, not hydroponic. And I had worms a long time ago, got out of it when we moved, and then someone was selling a worm composting thing for 50 bucks. So I bought it from her and I'm back in worms. And so just so you guys know, two of the common commercial worm composters, vermicomposters that you can get. This one is called the Worm Factory, and that's what I've got. And I could recommend this. It's square, it fits, it doesn't take up much room. The other one that has the most clever name ever is called Can of Worms, and it's round. But both of them are very similar. They have trays you can stack up, and they also have a spigot at the bottom so you can drain off excess moisture. So that's the commercial ones. But I just looked up, they cost at least 150 bucks and plus shipping. I did see them unpack one of the worm factories. It's all nicely packed in a square box. But today I am here to teach you a way that you can do worm composting just in tubs that you probably have, especially if you're in the villages and you do like us in Nome and buy your groceries and ship them back home on Alaska Airlines in tubs. And I'm just going to be showing you with these smaller, I don't know, these are probably 15 gallon, 10, maybe 10 gallon tubs, probably 7 to 10 gallon tubs with the yellow lids. But so this is a good starter size, but if you really want to get into it, you're probably going to go to bigger. So I'm planning on doing it with two. I've got one with no holes and then one that I put some little holes in, and I don't know if it'll show up. You can see that I just put four little holes in the corners, and that's so that excess water can drain out. On my worm factory, I had just a little jar under the spigot, and it was getting full. I didn't want to change it, so I shut it off for a week. And unfortunately, a bunch of the worms were in the bottom and they drown. They drown kind of easy. So they drown, and that's when you get bad smells when the worms die. They smell terrible. So you don't want to do that. You water just sitting in the bottom. So that's the reason for the idea of having two totes stacked up together. And to put my little holes, I just put small holes because I didn't want a whole bunch of the worms going into the bottom. They could fit through there, but it's not like a whole mesh. And to put these holes in, I have I think a shish kebab skewer, and I just put it in my propane stove burner and got it hot and melted the holes through, but you could drill them too. But I just put kind of small holes, and I just put 4 holes so that, anything with holes, it's going to leak, so that the moisture goes into the bottom. Then to get your bin started, you want to put some bedding in the bottom. And this is just some newspaper that I shredded up, and you want to get it wet enough that you can't squeeze out more than 4 drops of moisture. So that's what I did. I got it wet, and I can't really squeeze anything out of this. But everyone gets these mailers in the mail. And I just took a couple pages of it and ripped it up in shreds. And then got a handful of it wet, squeezed it out, and threw it in the bottom. And you want about 3 inches of bedding in the bottom. That first wad that I had was 2 pages of this, whatever they call it, the mailer. And it's kind of thick. So this one's kind of thick newspaper. And then I just put it under the faucet, got it wet, wadded it up. So that's your bedding. And the worms also eat paper. They like the fiber. And then after you've got your bedding in there, and bedding can be like what I just put in, newspaper. I like to start with newspaper in the bottom. But as you go, like egg cartons, sometimes if you get computers and they have this same kind of stuff, this is the kind of stuff I really like. But you can rip up pieces of cardboard, all that brown paper that comes with Amazon stuff. When you do the cardboard, remove all the tape. That will just, especially that Amazon tape, it's going to have just a bunch of strings. So you want to take the tape off. The other, and if you can remove any kind of the labels that's plasticky, that stuff will not go away. It'll still show up. So we make our bedding down in there. And then this is some of the worm compost that I got out of my composter this morning. Let's see. And there's a nice worm right on top there. Can you guys see him at all?
A little bit higher. Yeah, there we go. Perfect.
Okay. Yeah. So
Wow,
this
that looks
stuff,
like very nice compost, Cheryl.
yeah, and it's I've been using that liquid that comes out and mixing it with my when I water my house plants, and they love it. So I was kind of surprised. So I unstacked my worm factory thing, and I had a lot of worms in the bottom. Generally, they're supposed to work such that you put a new layer on top and feed them in the top, and then the worms move up, but they don't always do that. So there's obviously still food down in here, and I'll get to that. But anyway, we've got our what I'm starting with is just some of the worm compost and some of the worms out of my bin. And what they say you want to start with is about a pound of worms, and I think that's 1,000 worms if I remember right. But when you buy them, they usually do it by weight. So like that's about the size they are. And the type of worms that we use for composting are called red wigglers. Other garden worms from other places don't live in a bin as well as these guys. So that's what kind of worms you get, are red wigglers. So for starting a new bin, I just put my batch of worms in there. Then I didn't bring any, but you want to add some, like some potting soil or some sand, maybe a little bit of dirt. Worms need, like a chicken, they have a gizzard and they need something to grind up their food. So you want to put at least some of that in there. And you put your worms in, and then what you feed them is your kitchen scraps. And it can be, made a little list. You can put in eggshells. I feed mine lots of coffee grounds and I do drip coffee, so you can throw the whole filter and everything in there. You can feed them old bread, bread-like stuff. I avoid real sugary stuff, but I saw on the list you can feed them cake. If I was doing that, I'd take the frosting off because frosting has oil. You don't want to give them oil. That they don't break that down. You can give them tea bags, fruit, vegetable scraps, and then you also want to give them more of the roughage, the paper stuff. So the things that you don't put in, you don't put in any meat, no fish, no oils, so no dairy products. You can mostly you don't give them table scraps either. You could give them cooked vegetables, but not if it has a lot of salt. But you wouldn't just scrape plates if you've made a casserole or something that usually has meat, it has oil. You don't give them that stuff. And then in the flyers I've been reading this morning, I didn't see it, but I've always read to not give them too much citrus. You don't put um a whole bunch of like orange peels. And I don't put a whole bunch of onion waste either. Things that, onion can get pretty smelly if it rots. So I don't put a whole lot of onions, but I don't totally avoid onions. I just don't put lots of, like if you had a bunch of onions go bad, I would not put a big wad of rotten onions in my worm bin. I'd throw that in the compost outside. So when you go to feed them, a good way to do it is, well, I brought my favorite gardening tool. I wanted to show you guys this also. This is a little bit off topic of vermicomposting, but someone gave me one of these. They're called Japanese or Korean gardening tools. And I didn't use it for a few years. And once I started using it, it is my absolutely favorite hand tool. They're strong. They're great for digging in rocks. You can do so many things. You can make your rows. You can cover things up, all kinds of stuff. But something like this or one of those claw things, you can pull the top away, put your vegetable stuff down in there and kind of cover it back up. One thing worms don't like is light. They like to go away from the light. So if you put their food down in, they like it better.
I bought one of those, Cheryl, after you recommended it, and I love it.
Yeah, I can't. It was just so weird that I had mine for 2 or 3 years before I ever used it. And then it was like, oh my gosh, it's like 1,000 times better than one of those claw things.
Yeah.
Because this
Let
is,
me,
go
oh,
ahead.
sorry. I was going to say, let me pause here and see if there are any questions.
Okay,
And
good. Yeah.
if you can unmute yourself and just ask, or you can drop a question in the chat. What is the tool called
Oh,
again?
they call them either Japanese or Korean gardening tool. And it's kind of like if you can see it, it's kind of like a plow blade. If you're a farmer, it's kind of like a plow blade. It's curved. Um, it's this one is forged and it's pretty strong. It's pointed at the bottom. The first one I had is thinner, and so when I was digging in rocks, I kind of bent the end over, and I hammered it back. But if I chop on rocks, it bends again. But this one is pretty stout, and I think I saw them in maybe Territorial Seed Catalog, and they're like $20. And I haven't had any that had the handle fall off or anything like that. So for a hand tool, these are really great.
Yeah, that was the other question. Where do you get them? And then do you need to worry about ink on newspapers or anything like that?
You don't need to worry about ink. I think most of the ink these days is vegetable ink, but you don't want to put in shiny paper. Shiny paper, I just read, can have some kind of a clay on it, and they don't like that. Plus, it packs down really tight. Just like almost every living thing, worms need to be able to get oxygen. So you don't want stuff that just packs really tight. So avoid the shiny paper like magazine pages. But ink is fine. And cardboard, I wondered about the glue. I asked about that years ago, and one of the guys said dilution is the solution to the pollution, and there isn't that much glue compared to how much paper product is in cardboard, and cardboard rots pretty good, so cardboard's fine too. But my favorite really is the egg carton type stuff for the bedding and for the fiber, because I don't think I think it's just pressed paper, not much else in it, and it gets soft when it gets wet, so I just break it up and put it in there. If you're worried about it being too light for your worms, you can put a piece of cardboard over the top. Generally, I think the tubs are not so airtight. You don't want something that's completely airtight. If it's a big tub and you open it once a week, that's plenty of air for them. But if you're afraid they're not getting enough air, you could put some holes either in the side or in your lid. You probably all know what the lids to these things are like, but you could put some holes in the lid. And you want it to stay moist. The worms breathe through their skin and they need it to be somewhat moist. Having the holes, the actual liquid can drain out, so it's probably not going to be too wet. But if you put in a whole bunch of really wet food, it can get wetter than they want. So that's why you want a drainage. I like the two tubs stacked up. Now, with the commercial, these things, they come with trays. So you start off with one tray, and when it starts getting full, you can stack the next tray, which you could do stacking up another tub. And then you do some bedding and start feeding them just in the top tray. And they are supposed to migrate up. So your next bin, you would put bigger holes in it so that the worms can come up through it easier. Has anybody got any other questions? Mine, after all winter, I cleaned mine all out last winter or last fall. And so over the whole course of the winter, I think I've only got 3 trays and mine's full. It's ready to be cleaned out. So what I'm going to do is take the bottom tray, put it in a tub. Probably my stuff is pretty wet. You could see how wet it is. If it was more dry, you can shine a light on it and the worms will keep going farther and farther deeper into the pile to get away from the light, and you can scrape the by the way, the worm poop is called castings, so you can scrape the castings away and put it in your garden. You don't want to let it get just totally bone dry. That ruins some of the properties of what's really good, the humic acid that's really good in worm castings. And another way to get the worms to concentrate is to feed them in one part and they'll migrate over to where the food is. So I'm gonna start, harvesting so I have some empty trays to put on top.
What do you do with your castings?
Well, you can, for one thing you can do is mix it in water and water your plants with it, make like worm compost tea. You can also mix it right in when you're transplanting. You can put it around your perennials, any of those kinds of things.
Do you?
I have not put my own, just the castings like right in my house plants. I haven't done that, but I water my house plants with lots of the, not lots, but I mean the compost tea and the liquid that runs out.
Do you keep your worms in the winter?
Yeah, I have them. The My porch is inside our house. It's part of our house, but I have a curtain across, so it's definitely cooler out there. And yeah, so um worms like between like 55 and 75 degrees. Yeah, between 55 and 75 is what they really like. But my porch has gotten cold enough that there's been some ice crystals in it. It never froze solid, but the worms survived that. And if it gets really hot, it's probably going to kill them. So you don't want to have them just right out, like in the hottest sun in your greenhouse.
All right, we have a couple questions. How long does it take to typically have finished worm castings?
I guess I can't really answer that. I can say that when I got my worm factory, it was full of worms and castings, and I cleaned it all out. And so over this whole last winter, it's filled back up again. So it probably takes at least a couple months to get to where you could start harvesting some of the castings out of it. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I
I
harvest the tea, like the water that you can drain off. I harvest that all summer
yeah,
and I dilute it. Although, I mean, I don't know if you need to or not. I usually dilute it and water my plants with it.
I dilute mine too.
Okay.
Yeah, it comes out looking like super black tea. I mean, really black. And I'll use, oh, I have a little oh, it must be a quarter or a third cup measuring cup that I use to scoop out of my jar that, the water, the stuff runs into. And I'll put maybe a half a cup in a half a gallon of water, and that's, it's still really dark. So it's pretty
Yeah,
strong
and
stuff.
I don't know why I don't really harvest the castings in the summer. I usually just wait until the end of the year and then use it to amend beds. But I think you certainly could, grab the castings out at any time you wanted them.
Yeah, I think so too.
All right, another question. Oh, if worm compost dries out and the worms die, is it still beneficial and will adding water revive it?
Yeah, it will. I just, sometimes we wonder about things, and somewhere I came across a thing saying, it's better to not let it just get bone dry. I don't know exactly what that does to it, but it said like the humic acid wasn't as active, or maybe it changes it some, but it's still, no matter what, the worm castings are going to be beneficial for your plants and for
And
the texture of your soil.
A follow-up question to that is, Annabelle wants to restart her worm bin. Can she add new worms to the old compost and castings if she just moistens the original old castings?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's not going to hurt anything.
I think you could harvest those castings and use them and then
Yeah,
just
that too.
restart with what Cheryl had here. These are
Yeah,
good
and
questions, yeah.
if it was me, I would kind of like sourdough. I would probably keep some of the castings and put in with the new. And then but yeah, you could harvest what you've got too.
How do you deal with flies or other little insects?
So sometimes they can get pretty bad. If you try to keep dry stuff on the top, like cardboard, do your torn up cardboard over the top. That helps keep the flies down. I think me having mine in a cooler part of the house helps keep them down. I used to have mine in this old kind of little compact washing machine, and I'd hook some of those yellow sticky traps to the top so the flies would get stuck to those. But quite often you're going to end up with it's mostly fungus gnats. Quite often you are going to end up with some fungus gnats. And what fungus gnats do is they like moist soil, and they'll lay their eggs in your house plants. But to slow them down, if you put something like sand or pebbles, maybe the orchid bark or something like that on the top of the soil that's dry, they don't like that. They like it to be moist, so that will help keep them down.
I haven't vermicomposted in the winter. I know people have said like freezing your like ingredients, like, if you have your food scraps and you freeze them first, does that
Mm-hmm.
help?
That part, I don't know if it would help keep down fungus gnats. I think they don't come from nowhere. If you already have them in your house plants, yeah, they're probably going to find your vermicomposter. But I did read that freezing your stuff, the worms like the stuff kind of small. Freezing it does break it down and make it easier for the worms to eat it. So freezing your stuff first is definitely not a bad thing to do. Oh, I know one more thing I have. One more show and tell. I have some of my compost that I would be feeding to my worms. They like melons, so this is melon rinds, little bits of lettuce. So I usually just kind of either I'll put this stuff on the top. Oh, here's a no-no. The little stickers on fruit, if you can, you want to remove those because they're plastic and they will still show up no matter how old your compost is. So I like to take those things off. But like say on my fruit, I'll put this down so that they're going to want to eat that part before they probably want to eat this part. So you put that down, the dry stuff's on top, doesn't get quite so moldy. You can put paper towels if you didn't, wipe out your greasy pan, things like that. I had some carrots that were kind of yuck. I cut them up in pieces rather than just throw the whole carrot in there. And then generally, my stuff has lots of coffee grounds.
Yeah, we know about coffee in the bush. It's like one of
Yeah,
the food groups. Okay,
right.
before I forget, so Maya had a question about if you wanted to introduce worms from the compost into raised beds, what would be a good method for that, for the best survival of the worms, or should they just be focused on the castings and not the worms?
Okay, so the the answer from scientists and environmentalists and on all these handouts is you should try to just put the castings into your garden beds to prevent adding new species. We've got some people that are actually doing earthworm research up here. I think there were earthworms here when I came, but supposedly there weren't. But so you kind of try not to do that. And I have a lot of worms in my compost bin, but mine's big. It's like the size of it's made out of pallets, so it's 4 feet by 4 feet, and another bin beside it. And down in there, the worms survive or they, make the little they make like a cocoon, and one or two worms hatches out of those cocoons. Something's resistant because the worms are still there the next summer. But the red wigglers that are best for doing the vermicomposting, they're not just garden worms. So they're not really made to live over in your garden beds. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, I'd be curious if anybody has experience trying to, domesticate worms that, if you can't find the red wigglers or you can't source them or whatever, if you've tried making other worms be composting worms, let us know. I'd like to hear from you. I know I personally was shocked to find out that earthworms are not native to North America, that they were brought over. Like that just kind of blows my mind. And yes, there are invasive worms. I think I've heard about jumping worms for a couple of years. You have to be
Yes.
careful if you're buying any plants from the lower 48 to make sure you're not bringing up invasive worms that could harm the ecosystem. But yeah, it's tough.
Hmm. Yeah, the scientist that was up last summer, um, one of the effects they're looking for is, so our forests mostly have the leaf litter pile up. It rots, but it piles up, and especially like those jumping worms, they eat so much that they eat all of that leaf litter, and they're concerned about what it's going to do to the trees. It's going to change the environment that the trees grow in. So, um, I would suggest trying to get the red wigglers that aren't really that suited for living here. Some of them are going to make it outside if the little cocoons are going to hatch or whatever, but they don't seem to be a big problem. And when you get this going, you're going to have extra worms, so you can share them with other people too.
Yeah, Alaska Mill Feed, I know sells worms,
Yeah.
and I'm sure if you look on Facebook Marketplace, there's probably people that sell worms too. Let's see. So,
Cool.
Christy says she tried to domesticate earthworms out of a very wormy garden bed and they died over the winter. Were you trying to make them compost for you inside? And let's see. Yeah, just people talking about worms dying over the winter. So, yeah,
Yeah. I think that's why they use the red wigglers. They can handle these kinds of living conditions.
yeah. And there's, yeah, some for sale in Fairbanks at the hospice plant sale. So just places to buy your red wigglers.
Hmm.
Yeah. All right. Any other
Okay.
questions? Yeah, or keep going.
Emily is going to have um, a way for you guys to get these handouts, but the Cooperative Extension Service has these different flyers. They all basically say the same thing, but some of them are specifically, how to do it in a tub. Um,
Yeah, I put the link for the Corporate Extension Service publication called Composting with Worms in the chat. Let me know if you didn't get that. If you joined a little bit after that, I can post it again. Yeah.
okay. And so if your worms smell, mostly mine do not smell, except when I had shut that spigot. Dead worms smell terrible. You really want to avoid that. If it seems like everything's really wet, then maybe try to leave the lid off, add some more cardboard, that dry cardboard, so that it can soak up some of that water. Um, it, it's kind of one of those experience type of things that you get a feel for what's right for the worms. You know, if you can wring water out of it, it's too wet. If it's really dry, it's too dry. So you want it damp.
So when you go to harvest the water out of that your two tote system, you just pull them apart. Okay.
Yeah, just pull it apart and then you can pour the stuff out.
Nice.
So you'll want to, you'll get a feel for how much is going in there after you've checked it a few times, but you definitely want to empty it before it's starting to be wet liquid in the top one.
What if you wanted to
And
scale up and have a larger operation or deal with more compost? Would you just get separate buckets or what would you do?
well, in these, they're doing them in those big, like 18 or 20 gallon. See, they're doing them in the bigger tubs also. The top one's about the size of the kind I'm showing you now, and they're doing them in these bigger ones too. So you could scale up that much. If you want to go commercial, there is a guy in Anchorage that I don't know who he is, but he has a whole system with, I think he uses tubs, but he has a wooden framework and the castings fall out of the tubs into whatever he collects it in. And um, I should try to find out who he is. I've seen his stuff on Facebook before.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know who that
So
is.
he's got a whole system. If you wanted to, make lots of castings and have worms to sell and all that kind of stuff. I'll see if I
I'm
can
wondering,
figure that
how
out.
often do you feed them? Oh, and that's, yeah, how
Oh,
high will you pile things in the tote? Um,
Um, I'm thinking probably about half full, and then put another one on. I think maybe it is. That's what I was wanting to say, Iva. I think maybe that is Tim in Anchorage.
yeah, he also made some sample tubs for schools,
Mm-hmm.
that out of clear plastic totes so that they were a little bit more visible.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, he's got a little system that he uses if for like a classroom setup, if you're interested in that.
Mm-hmm. So the fuller the
I also, sorry, just wanted
oh,
to
go
add
ahead.
about the Tim. He has a great Facebook group. It's kind of uh like a lot of people put questions up there and he answers a lot of them. So it might be a good resource for people
Cool.
if they're getting worms.
Mm-hmm. Is he Tim's Plants or something like that?
Yeah, it's Tim's Plants, Produce, and Worms.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he's a nice guy.
Mm-hmm.
So how much do you feed them?
Well, I just a lot of times after you don't want to put hot coffee grounds in them, but when I'm ready to make a new pot of coffee, I dump my grounds in. I quite often I have maybe a can that I put my scraps in, and when it starts, before it turns all totally to mold, um, I'll give it to them. So it depends on how big your family is. If you have a big family, if you use lots of vegetables, you're probably going to need bigger than this to be able to feed the worms all your scraps. So it's kind of a trial and error type of thing. But these handouts do say, how much a half pound of worms can eat in how much time. They're saying add like a half a pound at a time. So these guys, feed them once a week. Don't overfeed them. They'll grow faster. You'll get more worms faster if it's warmer than if it's colder. Um, put the food in a different place. So kind of make a grid, feed them in different spots. So if you get 3.5 pounds of kitchen waste per week, that's a 1/2 pound of waste per day average. So a pound of worms can do a 1/2 pound of waste a day.
Yeah, I actually have a quick question. If you can hear me.
Lee?
Hi, Emily. How's it going? Um, so it was about with this bin system, when it comes time to harvest your castings, is it at that point, are the worms, are they moving into a separate bin, or do you have to go in there and separate your worms from their castings and then put the worms back in?
Well, theoretically, you could put another bin on top, feed them there, and they should move up into where the food is. But like I said, today I hadn't really taken my worm factory apart till this morning, and I was surprised to see worms still down in the bottom. So you're probably going to have to do some separating of worms from the castings.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a piece where I feel like I could do better, like you sort of have to like, you know, you're if you put the food all in one spot, they'll migrate over there and then you can grab the castings out of the other spot. I don't know,
Mhm.
maybe like a week or something, where like you pile a new thing of food and they'll all go over there. But there's going to be some, people worms hanging out on on the other side. But hopefully, I know it's every worm is special, but
Yeah.
that you have to just sort of like that'd be a great job for children.
Oh, right.
Separate the worm. They would love
Right.
that. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's going to always be some in the castings, even if you do that, if you shine the light on them, and if you feed them in a special spot, and there's still going to be some stragglers in with all the castings.
Thanks so much, Cheryl.
Okay, and since I teach, I have a couple things else that I wanted to say that I always tell my students. If someone wants a textbook for gardening in Alaska and you're not in Anchorage, I have found this to be the best textbook that is for the more rural. There even is some stuff from Kotzebue in here, and it's mostly cooperative extension service information, but this is the gardening book I recommend to my students. And most gardeners sooner or later are asked to do something with children, and I always say I love doing nasturtiums with kids. If you're a beginner and you haven't planted nasturtiums. Let's see how I can show how big that, well, the seeds are that big. So they're a good size, and everything about the nasturtium plant is edible. So if they have little brothers and sisters at home, they're not going to hurt them by growing nasturtiums. So that's just my general, not off the worm topic for gardening.
That's great. I mean, I was just thinking last week I was at Fairview with the gardening club, and the job of the children was to mix some compost into like just the top part of the soil. And of course, they just went nuts digging for worms, and it was, they had names for them and everything. So like children and worms go together like peanut butter and jelly.
That is great. That is great.
Ah, yeah. All right, Cheryl, we so appreciate having you here. So thanks for giving us your time.
Okay.
And yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thanks for asking me, and keep growing, everybody.